This is Hendrick Tallardar with the November Nullsec recap. At the end of October, reports came in that Russian Alliance's Solar Fleet, against all authorities, Darkness of Despair, and the collection of alliances known as Stainwagon ceased their long-standing animosity with one another to invade the N3 coalition space in the south of New Eden. The first shots were fired by N3 as a preemptive defense to this move by the Russians. Within the first 48 hours of the new war, a massive fight broke out in the GE-8JV system, in which the infrastructure hubs were exiting their reinforcement timers. As a result, both sides of the war amassed over 3,000 pilots into the system, which saw the Russians bringing Tengus with Pandemic Legion and Nullsec from N3 and Proteuses, their allies Insidious Empire and Shield Rail Brutixes. Meanwhile, N3 member Northern Coalition brought Lokis with Maelstroms being provided by Darkspawn and the Unthinkables. N3 lost the strategic fight after being outnumbered 2-1. Not long after, another fight broke out in G15Z-W as another infrastructure hub exited its reinforcement during the prime time for European players. Another massive fight, reaching roughly 2,600 pilots, broke out despite the relative unimportant nature of the system. During this battle, 32 Lokis, 24 Proteuses, 14 Typhoon Fleet issues, 20 Tengus, and hundreds of less costly wrecks littered the battlefield. Most notably, a mildly intoxicated Wyvern supercarrier was taken down shortly after by Black Legion. The Wyvern was attempting to reinforce a player-owned customs office in the Catch region. Later that day, the N3-controlled outpost in KW-I6T came out of its shield reinforcement. This was the only non-Russian-owned system in Catch, and as a result, Darkness of Despair, members of the Russian bloc, made a play for the timer, bringing roughly 30 dreadnoughts to the station. In response, Pandemic Legion counter-dropped with their Slowcat supercarrier fleet. The dreadnoughts escaped after losing approximately 7 capital ships. But this left Pandemic Legion's fleet on the station without any sub-capital support. It then became a mad dash between N3 and the Russians to fight over the Pandemic Legion capitals. As the fight continued to escalate, it became apparent that the server node was not reinforced and would likely collapse. After 6 hours of fighting to maintain the game, the node eventually did crash, and N3 ordered their fleet members not to log in, allowing the Russians to destroy the I-hub and reinforce the outpost into its armor cycle. After the fight in KW-I6T, AAA blundered slightly by dropping their control of the F4R2-Q system as a result of a logistical error. This system was supposed to be the new staging point for AAA in Darkness of Despair. However, due to the mistake in which the territorial claim unit for AAA was turned off, they had to move back to their original staging system in GE-TAC. It was later discovered that there was a mistake in which the TCU was thought to be a Sovereignty Blockade unit, causing the mix-up. The KW-I6T station exited its armor reinforcement without any defense mounted by N3, and the F4R system was able to be quickly secured by the Russian bloc to prevent any further delays in their war effort. Shortly thereafter, the Russians decided to attempt a headshot against N3 by attacking their staging system directly. The system in question was attacked despite the normal trend of attacking the staging system of the enemy for later in the war. As was expected, the placing of the SBUs provoked a battle before they came online. After successfully defending the system, N3 began to place their own SBUs in a number of Russian-controlled systems in the Catch region. Later, on November 12th, mildly intoxicated outpost in E-YJ8G exited its final reinforcement timer, leading to another confrontation between N3 and the Russian bloc. N3 lost most of the direct fighting, but were able to destroy the Russian SBUs, saving the system. N3 were then able to successfully prevent the Russians from onlining any new SBUs in the system, winning the strategic victory. As the war was entering into its third week, Goonswarm Federation and Clusterfuck Coalition leader the Mittani released his monthly CEO update. In it, he called for the CFC to enter the war as, quote, honorable third parties, end quote, as a subtle jab at N3's stance in the Fountain War earlier in the year. N3 entered the Fountain War as third parties, but eventually became one of the main workhorses for the defending Test Alliance. Because of their ability to aggravate and cause CFC more problems than they expected, the Mittani called for the CFC to return the favor and reminded his members of the noted claim by Pro-God Legend from N3 that N3 solely existed to wipe the CFC out. A few days later, the war began to heat up, as was expected with the CFC's influx of pilots. The next clash was over the L7ZS-5 system, which was controlled by AAA and had its outpost exiting its final armor timer. Although the SBUs were destroyed by the Russians, saving the system, N3 opted to engage regardless to enjoy a good fight. The battle saw Local reach 2,400 ships, which resulted in N3 coming out on the losing end of the fight. As the final week before the American Thanksgiving came to an end, a fight broke out in G-O-Q86, the staging system for the CFC. N3 forces had been attempting to bump a CFC Titan out of a staging player-owned tower, and it quickly escalated from there. Eventually, the CFC ended up losing the near 1,000-man battle. It also became apparent that another front of the war was beginning to form, as Insidious Empire had redeployed from the Curse region to the north to further assist in defending the space near Vale of the Silent and Calavella Expanse. Gentleman's Agreement, a CFC member, had begun to invade that space, attacking the N3 renters in that area. The fight in the north went back and forth throughout the initial battles. On November 23rd, a fight for the E-YJ8G outpost resulted in another node crash, which saw capital ships fighting between the N3 and Russian blocks, with their allies involved. After the node unexpectedly crashed, a mad scramble to log back in and re-engage ensued by both parties. The crash allowed the bulk of the dreadnoughts on the field to escape, as well as the carriers and supercarriers. Roughly 48.4 billion ISK worth of fighter bombers owned by N3 and Pandemic Legion were destroyed due to being unable to reconnect after the node crashed and rebooted. It has been stated that the node crashing swung the battle in favor of the Russian and CFC side of the fight. 17 hours later, the ZJA-6U system saw another large-scale fight. The ZJA station shield timer was the cause of the battle, which saw dreadnoughts and carriers being brought by both sides. After several hours of fighting, the station eventually was knocked into armor reinforcement. Notably, during the battle, PL and N3 carriers were supposedly able to repair each other by using a spy dreadnought in Russian comms. The spy would relay what ship the Russians were primarily targeting, allowing PL and N3 to provide logistic support for it. The supposed spy was found and purged, with his capital ship destroyed mid-fight. The existence of the spy has been denied by Pandemic Legion and N3. This was the last notable fight before the American Thanksgiving holidays, which brought the month to a close. Skirmishes have been happening across the warfront, but the war itself has been a slow-paced fight. Many are predicting that following the week-long lull in fighting, the war will break out again once the month closes. For more EVE Online news, visit thematani.com.